Hey, Facebook friends, thank you for your patience. We are learning the ropes on this live cast, a little camera that we're working here with, and I just want to thank you for being here. I don't know if you know who we are, Pam Vredevelt, licensed professional counselor, and Dr. Swarner, who has been a prominent psychiatrist in the Portland area for over 40 years, treating thousands of people.
Probably.
Helping them to improve their emotional health and also increase their quality of life. And first up, we want to thank you for being here. This is about you. This is not about us. This is about helping you and giving you some tips on how to heal after a loss. And Warner, I know that you don't speak from an ivory tower. You have your own seasons of grief and suffering just like the rest of us. But you also have some wonderful practical knowledge from all your studies. And you just told me today that you started in OBGYN.
That's right. My training career actually began after medical school when I entered OBGYN. My brother was a fairly prominent, I will use that word correctly there, pediatrician and neonatologist who deals with newborns and critical issues around pregnancy. And he was very excited that I was going to join him, his younger brother, being a partner, pediatrician, having an OBGYN partner. But I got into my OBGYN training and I realized I think I had a calling in the direction of psychiatry. So after a period of time, I was able to transfer residency training programs from OBGYN surgery into psychiatry, and it was the Lord leading, because it was definitely finding where my skill sets were, I think, better used.
That's so fun to hear how God orders our steps and leads us into those things that He's gifted us for, right?
It is.
And so together we've probably been practicing over 65 years combined experience. We walked with a lot of people through painful losses and also into positive transformation. And we want to make a commitment to you today that we are going to give you as much as we possibly can in this limited time. And we also make the promise that at the end of the live cast, we're going to give you some other information on how you can take your, maybe some training and additional support to the next level.
Yes.
I particularly have a passion, and with your OB/GYN background as well, for women who have lost a baby. And it's kind of a personal passion because when I was 5 months pregnant with our first baby, I went into the OB/GYN's office just full of energy and life and excitement to hear the heartbeat again. And after some testing, heard the doctor say to me, I'm not picking up a heartbeat, Pam. There doesn't appear to be any fetal movement, and I think the baby's dead. And as you can imagine, that just turned my world upside down. And it began for me a very dark night of the soul, a season that I just will never forget. So we've both gone through seasons of loss that have been difficult, and we don't want that for you in terms of being alone and not having support and hope and guidance. We want you to have those things because a lot of people, truth be told, do try to muscle through grief and suffering after a loss like this alone. So, by the end of this live cast, you're going to have some very practical tips that you can begin to implement today that should be helpful in easing some of that suffering. So we're going to cover like 9 different tips.
I hope we do. We have a lot to cover, and it's very complicated, but we'll try to make it understandable. The idea is not to escape from feelings. That's not our idea in communicating with you. It is not trying to just make it stop hurting, but it's really how to get the body back on a recovery mode, healing, the brain healing that needs to take place after a severe loss, catastrophe, and biological upset that we use the word chaos, or just a complete explosion inside a person when you've experienced a loss like this.
Yeah. So we want to break those 9 tips down into 3 different categories. So we want to offer 3 different tips to ease the suffering caused by that impact of loss on the brain, on our nervous system. And we want to offer 3 tips for connecting with God and kind of moving through the anxiety that comes naturally after a loss, more into a peaceful place. And then we want to cover 3 tips for dealing with those haywire postpartum hormones.
Haywire is a good term for this.
That go on after either a miscarriage, stillbirth, or the loss of a baby.
Yeah.
It's just topsy-turvy when life, when you go through these catastrophic things. And we'll give you as much as we can, but we also promise that at the end, we're going to give you some other information about actually an opportunity for moms to take their support and their training a step further. But let's get to the expert here. Would you break it down for us? How does the attachment that we have to our baby before the loss, and then that subsequent loss, impact brain chemistry?
Well, I don't want to talk too much about bonding and attachment, but it begins way before this event. Attachment and bonding actually occurs in your mind even when you begin thinking about having a child, becoming pregnant. Even maybe starts as far back as childhood, of dreaming and imagining, I'm going to have a baby, I'm going to raise a family, and what that will be like. So your mind starts preparing for attachment and bonding by developing ideals and ideas that you hope to fulfill. Then comes a pregnancy. Pregnancy for a woman is haywire to begin with because hormones, and there are many hormones, we won't talk about all 75 of them, but the hormones that have to do with pregnancy, reproduction, and the body regulation climb very high. Estrogen, progesterone, you know what those are, go very high. And then at delivery or at a miscarriage or the loss of a pregnancy, precipitously, these hormones drop. Your body, which was adapted to them getting higher and higher, suddenly has to face a huge drop. And this has an effect on not only just the brain, but the entire body.
Everything feels haywire.
Everything is haywire. And you've heard baby blues. I'm certain you've heard the term or experienced, but it's a real thing. It is not just the way you feel because you've lost something or you didn't get what you wanted. This actually is from a drop in the biological level of those hormones and the effect that has on the brain, and a depression type of syndrome can set in. Now, people are different. Every single person is unique, and I think we wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, because I appreciate your sensitivity to the fact that every brain is unique, and there's kind of a continuum of these symptoms, right? From minor to extreme.
Exactly.
And I don't know, I for myself, after we had that double whammy going on, not only the sadness of the loss and psychologically trying to wrap my head around that, but all these hormones that are dropping, boy, I just found myself in a very, very black hole.
You were in a wreck.
Yeah.
That didn't mean that you were the wreck, but being in a wreck, your stress hormones go through the roof.
Yeah.
Your heart rate, your levels of control transmitters from your brain go through roller coaster experiences. And somehow you have to start recovery from this accident. It's a physical insult to your body and brain that occurs with this type of loss.
So it isn't what people say, it's just in your head, meaning it's just in the way you're thinking about this. No, it might be in your head, but on many different levels.
And each one of us have different sensitivities. Now, that's not just saying one person is more sensitive than the other or cries more easily. It really means each one of our bodies have different sensitivities to these levels of control regulating hormones. 75 of them in the body, everything from thyroid hormone to reproductive hormones. Each body, your body, responds a little bit differently than the next person's. So we can measure those levels chemically from a laboratory, a blood draw, and see what the level is, and we know what average is supposed to be. But that really doesn't tell us the whole picture. It doesn't tell us what each individual person's sensitivity, and some individuals' brains are very sensitive to that drop in estrogen level. And depression can be triggered, and it can trigger a whole range of other syndromes we're not going to talk about in terms of even psychosis, but that's a totally different animal.
Right,
than
right.
understanding this
And
loss.
so when you think about that continuum, if I were to bring in the middle kind of a parenthesis of the average person, average mom that has just lost a baby, I would say that most of the women that I have talked with over the years in the counseling office and just other moms that I know who've suffered a loss, that's a pretty black hole and a big roller coaster time. And I remember myself, just feeling so raw and fragile. I opened the fridge to think about what am I going to fix for dinner, and standing there not being able to make a decision and bursting into tears because I can't make a decision. It affects my thinking processes and, decision making, and to drop an egg on the floor when I'm fixing breakfast and to burst into tears because I'm just raw. And the nerves are just so sensitive.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond that too. It goes beyond the point, like you said, unable to make decisions, unable to really clarify what your priorities are and what you need to do next to get out of this black hole.
It feels like that swirling black vortex that it's sucking you down, it's sucking you in.
That's right.
So let's get to some answers.
Okay.
Let's talk about some practical tips to ease the suffering and to kind of help our bodies move back into that balance point.
That's what we want to do, because again, we're talking about an accident as though you had fallen down a mountain. You're bruised, battered, maybe your bones are even broken. Your whole body has been shaken, as well as your mind.
You hurt at every level.
You hurt at every level. So what we're talking about today is how to begin climbing out of that chasm that you find yourself when this accident has happened. Terrible loss.
Yeah.
No greater loss, in fact.
So I love the way you approach this because it's very fresh, and I think it's creative and very common sense as well. But you talk about rewiring the brain and healing as being related to our five senses.
Yes.
And it just makes it so simple when you think about taste, touch, hearing, sight, smell.
That's right. Our brain gets its information from all these different sources. Hearing, touch, sight, smell, the ones you began to list. And that's input. That's information that comes in. But we need to stimulate how our brain begins to process information and produce output in order to get its control systems working again, to begin a journey back toward healing. We'll call it normalization, to begin to return to a semblance of body and brain relationship control, because this is a wreck. This is a terrible accident that's happened, and your body has to sense things out, get information, make decisions, and begin moving ahead.
Yeah. So if we go basically to the five senses, let's just start with sight. I know that for myself, after our loss, it seemed like the world was very grayscale.
Dark.
Very dark, very gray, and that was my internal world.
Yes.
But it affected how I saw everything. So how do we use the sense of sight to begin to rewire the brain following loss in a way that heals?
Well, we try to stimulate our brain through sight. We try to change the colors we're experiencing and that we're around. Friends may be trying to be helpful in bringing color into your life by bringing you flowers. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's important to experience that color, to to try to let in more bright light from the windows, open the shades, and experience a variety of colors and hues and temperatures of light and dark.
So I'm on a practical side. What I'm hearing you say is intentionally
Yes.
insert more color that you are consciously, mindfully looking at, exposing your eyes to,
Processing color.
and those circuits in the brain are activated and stimulated by doing so.
First and easiest way to do it. Not very good from just watching television, but definitely getting away from just the computer screen, but beginning to add other senses to your color experience, however. Sound is helpful. Touch is incredibly important to get the brain processing information again, to reach out and maybe touch a flower, to touch something colorful, to touch, to experience a different sensation with the color. Begin blending your senses together.
I remember feeling the ache in my empty arms after we lost our baby, and you mentioned about how shifting to a different form of touch can actually, in that moment when you're feeling that ache,
Yes.
help.
Not just staying with the same paradigm or the same visual things that you're accustomed to, looking at the same flowers on the wall, but beginning to change the brain's channels, changing the input, changing it just from one set, customary, familiar surrounding to another.
So what would that look like if my arms were aching just from the emptiness of not having my baby? How can I shift that in terms of touch?
How can you change touch? What other things have you touched in the past that's different than what you're missing? What other things have you experienced that's a positive
That have brought
input,
comfort.
that have brought comfort to you?
Yeah.
Now, what brings comfort to you may not bring comfort to everyone,
Right.
but it's very important to get some ideas like this from people around us. Is what do you enjoy? What is, not just enjoy, maybe that's the wrong word, because when you're in a loss like this, you may not be able to comprehend enjoy. You can't remember how feeling good was. But changing the channel to something else that's not bad. So is there something else you could touch that was not stressfully dangerous?
So for me, that I found comfort sometimes in just hugging a pillow, curling up with a pillow and a really soft, comfortable blanket that shifted me out of that ache.
Do you know that even thinking about touching a feather or having a feather touch you begins to stimulate other areas of your brain? And that's what we're looking at, is to try to open up areas of your brain that want to shut down. They don't want to be available to other inputs because you're grieving. You've come down, you've fallen down a mountain, you're beat up, you're lost. You don't know where the next turn is going to lead you. So your brain doesn't want this information, but to actively have your brain think about, what does it feel like to be touched by a feather? When you mention pillow, I think a feather. Right?
Yeah.
Changing the channel just a little bit to move ahead.
That makes perfect sense. So I remember you talking about how grief can feel so smothering. And so you talked about switching the channel to opening things.
To opening things up. If you can identify, the first step in this process is to begin to identify what you are feeling, and not try to encompass it just in one idea. What you're feeling, then trying to change the channel to a different feeling. If you're feeling smothered, to try to begin to feel open air or open experience.
Yeah. So
not vulnerable, frightening, not standing on the edge of a cliff, not making yourself a target, but being able to just open up a little more and experience broader inputs.
So something as simple as opening the blinds,
Opening
a door for more fresh air in the room. And there was another thing that I remember you teaching on about how when we're feeling especially vulnerable, which is definitely a part of the after a loss, you just feel extremely vulnerable and exposed. And you would talk about bringing things in. When you're feeling exposed, bring objects in closer to you to reduce that anxiety.
That's right. When you're vulnerable from being overexposed or feel the threat of invasion, then trying to bring things in closer to you.
Yeah, so like pillows or
Teddy bears,
safe people,
blankets,
changing up maybe even the way you arrange your bedroom or living room or your kind of your safe place.
These are restoring objects that may be from your past were safe identifications, were comforting things, different for everyone. But trying to identify a change in the channel.
We have got an issue here with saying that our backup has failed, but we're going to go ahead and continue.
Yes.
That was a warning light. I'm not sure what it was about, and I'm not going to worry about it.
Hope you're all there.
I hope you're still with us. So what about sound? I know music for me. I had to be very careful about what I saw on television, what I listened to on the radio, because again, that rawness after birth and postpartum and in loss. You talk about switching channels with sounds.
Yes, that doesn't mean you want to go from a comforting lullaby to a brass band blaring or a rock and roll concert. But it does mean just changing the level of your stimuli a little bit, trying to change your inputs and not staying locked in the same space where your grief is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Even a quiet fan?
Yes, a fan. And that includes, there's a tactile or a touch sensation accompanying with the moving of the air. You actually feel relief of anxiety when you feel a gentle breeze blowing on your face.
Interesting.
I know patients that have actually bought little battery-powered fans and use that as a comforting thing that they can do, not all day long, but just at moments when they're feeling particularly closed in, hard to breathe, very anxious. Use that little fan blowing on their face.
Fascinating.
Moving air.
It makes sense to me. One of the things that was fascinating to me in some of the research that I did for the Empty Arms Journal was the brain science related to brain SPECT imaging actually shows that the same circuits in the brain are activated when you see an object on the table, like let's say a banana. I'm looking at a banana on the table in real time, in real life, right in front of me. The same circuits that are seen active when I'm doing that are the same circuits that are active when I'm just thinking about that banana. Not seeing it, but just imagining it in my mind. And I just think it's fascinating.
Well, it really is. It to a brain scientist, that seems simplistic, but to me, it sounds very practical. You can change your experience by changing your thinking.
Yes.
And again, we're not driving at ways to try to stop hurting. We're really trying to look at ways to change our perceptions, change our experience just enough that our brain can start feeling more stability, more control, and head back toward that normal feeling we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I know that research also shows that friendships and safe people in our lives are critical for emotional healing and just plain good health and quality of life. But that whole piece, when people are not available for some reason, when there is nobody else around and we are aching, we are grieving deeply and everything seems haywire with our emotions, just thinking about a safe person, someone that we trust, someone that we feel seen by, completely accepted, that has the ability to release the oxytocin in our brain and kind of calm us down and give us that everything's going to be okay feeling. And so one of the things that I would do, I remember at night, like if John was out of town and I was alone and just aching, I'd just put my hands over my heart, just like this, and feel the warmth of my hands right here, kind of get my my focus right there, and I would breathe really deeply, and as I breathed in, I would just say, God, I just pray that you'd fill me with your Holy Spirit. Fill me up with your Holy Spirit of peace. And as I exhaled, I would say, and I give you this pain. I just turn it to you. And I ask you to heal my heart. And I just, those kinds of statements, and I know I'm going to be okay because you've got me covered. We're going to get through this together. Those kinds of simple statements and connecting with physical touch.
Physical touch, connecting with the thinking of bringing the thoughts up, helps reinforce that process.
Yeah.
Makes it more real.
Makes it more real.
Uses more what we call brain circuits. They're beginning to engage not just memory, but words, expressing it out loud, I trust. Some of us just pray thinking, but you know, if you're alone, if you can do this, to pray out loud, to speak out loud as though a person were in the room with you, is not crazy. It really helps because that starts engaging even more brain circuits. Your brain hears what you're saying. The part of your brain that has to think of the words and format them with meaning all become engaged, and that starts getting your brain working again.
Yeah. I remember a client telling me, and she was in the middle of some pretty horrific changes, losses, and she would often see herself in a boat on this stormy sea with, high waves towering above her, shifting in the wild wind, and she would see herself going to the back of the boat and laying down with Jesus, and Jesus putting his arm over her and just kind of tucking her in tight and reminding her she was going to be okay.
And she had that complete mental image then of what that safe place in the back of the boat with arms around her and the waves calming was.
Yep.
She already had that in her brain, and she was able to access that. Now, some of us may not have easily accessible pictures like that. So the exercises that I have my patients do is to formulate pictures like that. Doesn't mean a whole album, but 3 or 4, I call them 3x5 cards, that describe a moment in time that you can recall actively with your brain and engage as many circuits as possible. I'll give you one of mine.
Yeah.
One of mine is on a beach. It's not every beach. There is a mental beach that my brain goes to where the air is warm but not hot. The sand is warm but not boiling hot and not cold. And there's a breeze, and I can hear the seagulls quietly quacking or whatever they do. And I can smell the sea breeze and the salt air, and there are particularly a couple of odors that I can recall associated with comfortable, safe places on a beach that are very positive. And I can see myself, and I can feel the sand. I can feel my toes scrunching the sand. And I have this little scenario that I've mentally written out on a 3x5 card that I can replay and then engage all those circuits to change a channel.
And the result of that is what?
Well, it doesn't change what's happening.
Right.
It doesn't make pain go away. But then it enables me to know I can change to another card or another card. I can change channels at times when I'm having difficulty processing, overcoming, or dealing with a situation that's very stressful.
And the bottom line here is you change your brain, you change your experience, you change the circuitry that's going on, you change how you are experiencing whatever's going on.
Precisely.
Yeah. So here's a question. After a loss, it's natural to feel quite a bit of anxiety for most of us. Does anxiety mean that I'm lacking faith?
Well, anxiety, we can't define what it is, but we do know that anxiety is a fear response that something is going to change. Maybe something bad is going to change. Maybe something good. We are all anxious even for Christmas to come. But something is going to change, or something needs to change. Now, usually if something needs to change, it's more of a fear experience. It's like, I've got to do that, and I'm afraid. But anxiety is a warning signal inside us that we need to plan or process a change to do something different. And that's not a bad thing. When you think about it, if you don't feel anxious, you probably aren't going to get up out of bed. You're not going to make breakfast or buy food or go to the store. Anxiety, and you say, well, that's not anxiety. Well, what is it? You know, it is. It's processing the need to change. I need more groceries in my cupboard. And when you break anxiety down, there are different levels of this need to change. And then there are overwhelming levels, and those are the ones we have to then prioritize and decide, are these things that I can do something about, or are these something I want to give to God? In between, there's bringing other people and engaging them.
Yeah.
But we have to begin to process, because sometimes we get stuck on worrying about things with anxiety that are not things that are meant for us to be able to do anything about. And then there are other things that we can.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing this right, it's really a good exercise to kind of break down, when we're anxious, what can I do? What can I not do?
What can I not do?
But because there's always something you can do.
There's always something you can do or change. And I mean, you break that down small enough, and it may mean I can just sit here or I can cry.
Yeah.
I can drag my feet or I can walk. And those differences give back to your brain the ability to choose. And choosing reestablishes some degree of control. Again, recentering the control that we should have and dividing that from the control God has helps us get back to this normal in the middle plane. I'm not responsible for everything. I can't control anything. No, there's something in the middle which I can change or do.
Yes. And it's very empowering, I think, to remind ourselves, you always have choices. Always. There's never a time when you don't have choices. That's the greatest gift God has given us, is the gift of choice. And that's entrusted to us. And there's always something that we can do, even if it's little. When I'm feeling completely paralyzed and overwhelmed and powerless, and I really don't know where to start, in that moment I have a choice. I can choose to acknowledge, I don't know where the heck to start. So, God, I'm going to ask you for some wisdom here.
And that's a choice in itself.
That's a choice in itself.
Yes.
I can acknowledge I'm out of gas. I don't have any energy. I really don't think I can do this.
And strangely enough, that's a choice in itself.
Yes.
That begins enabling your brain to get centered.
Yeah.
Just assessing a problem more accurately, breaking it down from being there's nothing I can do, it's hopeless, I can't go anywhere, to realize, well, yes, you can cough or sneeze. Well, those aren't choices. Well,
they are.
We're beginning to decide. A choice is a decision about what you can do. Now, I can't change my feelings. Can you? Can you just stop a feeling if you're having a feeling? Can you stop even a thought? Have you been able to stop a thought that enters your mind?
Not always.
I can't either.
Not always. I can capture a thought, and then I have a choice.
That's right. And that's what we're talking about. Changing our inputs, changing channels, and making decisions. Choices.
Choices.
Even if they're small ones.
So let's get to that.
All right.
Let's get to the tips for how we can kind of move through anxiety into peace and God's part in all of that.
Yes.
So how do you do that with God? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, big question.
It is a big question. I know you're creator. I know you know your creator, and you're pretty. You're pretty. What's the word I want? You marvel. That's the word I want. You marvel at His power.
That's where I start. When I am actually getting tired of begging God for a change, I don't quite know what it is I can do in a situation. I go to the step in the other direction and I start praising God for His power, for His awesome creation. And believe me, if you don't know where to start at that end of the scale rather than, oh God, if you could just change the amount of money in my checking account to cover those bills. wait a minute, let's move back to who it is we're talking to. I'm talking to the Creator. Well, then he could change my checking account, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but let's talk to God, and he likes hearing from us. And it helps our brain to respect the awesome power that he actually has, the awesome access that we have to a creative, loving God that has a desire for a connection between us, even when we're hurting, when we're lost, even when we're angry and blaming him.
Yeah. It's the promise that we have is he's close to the brokenhearted.
Exactly.
When Jesus was on this earth, he always went to the brokenhearted, those that were minimalized and marginalized and suffering. God cares about our suffering.
That's where he was drawn.
That's right.
And if we go back to that root, it gives us a good place to start. Respecting who he is.
That's what we can do.
Yes.
That's what we can do. And if we have kind of maybe a difficult past with relationship with God or church experience, where do we start? Well, I guess we start with, God, I need a new picture of really who you are, because the past information that I have really doesn't give me a lot of comfort. So reveal yourself to me in new ways that demonstrate your goodness and your love and your compassion.
And you know what may be blocking that picture of being able to access God might be our anger.
Yep, definitely. And that's a loaded one. And we need to do a full live cast on anger that we bury towards ourselves, towards others, towards God, and how that affects our healing process. But another way that we can move through anxiety into peace, praise was fabulous. Inviting God into our pain and asking him to do what we cannot do for ourselves.
That's right.
Empowering us, asking him to empower us and give us the energy that we need to just do the next thing.
And the next thing, again, may be something very small.
Yeah.
It may just be finding the peanut butter.
Yeah, and that's okay. God is not a taskmaster.
No.
I think he's far more gentle with us than we are with ourselves.
I know he is. And I'll tell you, some of the more intimate experiences that I have day to day with God is over, I just dropped a little nail on the floor. I have to look for it. That's a moment in my life that I turn to God.
Yeah.
It's like, what? God,
can you help me find this?
Help me find a nail. And I don't just say, God, help me find that nail. I say, Lord, I know you're involved in my life right now, even over the fact that I just dropped a small tack on the floor. If you're involved here, I'm not testing you to say you have to help me find it. I'm just saying, be with me as I look.
Yeah.
And if I need to find it, I'll find it. And if I don't, I'm going to get another tack and another nail and leave that one wherever it fell.
I can tell you how many times I found a lost contact asking for God's help, and it was there.
But it's the times he doesn't necessarily break through that window pane and come right to us and say, here's the miracle you're asking for. Sometimes it's just the experience of, I'm glad you called.
Yeah, I'm glad
I'm waiting to talk to you.
That's good.
I'm glad to hear from you. And those are the experiences that begin to help us break through this shut off, walled off, anxious emotion of loss.
Yeah. Let's switch gears and go to postpartum hormones, which are particularly difficult after we lose a baby, because we've got the psychological trauma going on, as well as all of these turbulent, haywire hormones that affect us emotionally.
It's more than just the blues. Matter of fact, they've even now tried to get away from even calling it abnormal. They're actually almost calling it part of the postpartum or post-delivery or post-pregnancy experience, to help us understand that this change in hormones precipitates, for most women, not just a small sliver of women, a change that we equate with depression, being unable to think clearly, make decisions, to feel good about oneself, to stop crying, to emotionally process, to remember positive emotions. This wall comes down. We don't have to always call it depression, but it is a part of the experience of going through the hormonal shift following the termination, whatever type, or loss from a pregnancy.
Yeah. So let's talk about 3 tips that we can do to kind of move back to balance. That's the whole goal,
Balance.
is getting back to balance. What's a tip that can help us along those lines?
Well, one for sure is getting your day and night regulated. So maybe the simplest
Routine.
one. A
Day
routine.
and night.
Reestablishing a routine. Doesn't have to be a rigid schedule, but reestablishing a day and night cycle, a get up and go to bed cycle, a time to eat cycle. These are what we call time givers in psychiatry, and they're very important to reestablishing your body's hormonal regulation of day and night, the diurnal or daily cycle in your body.
Okay.
First thing that you can do.
Okay. Are there any types of supplements or, over-the-counter natural supplements that would help us?
A lot of research recently has pointed again to the fact that we're, as a society, not just individuals in the rainy Northwest, low on vitamin D. Even if you have it in your diet and you're in a lot of sunshine, there are, I want to say, countless number of problems that now seem to be associated with low vitamin D levels, and very, very few that are associated with getting too much vitamin D. You can get toxic on too much vitamin D, so it's not something to overindulge in. But frankly, adding a modest amount of available D3, which is the type of vitamin D that's absorbed and gets into your system best, is pretty safe advice. Vitamin D3. And it doesn't hurt usually to take a multiple vitamin along with that. I'm saying, well, there's vitamin D in the multiple vitamins. It's usually not enough. So I usually say a gel cap of vitamin D is 2,000 to 5,000 units of vitamin D along with a multiple vitamin. And there's one other thing.
What about, there was a substance that you talked about?
Oh, yes. Now this is a little more complicated because it is a supplement. It's called L-methylfolate.
And we'll put that in the summary notes for you.
Methylfolate. Can be spelled with a hyphen or as one word. And it is available at health food stores. It is available in well-stocked centers that have a full array of vitamins. And taking about 15 milligrams of that a day certainly is not dangerous. That's my first. It's not overly expensive. You don't have to buy an expensive one. And it generally helps people certainly that are vulnerable to depression. And in a time like this, any little thing that won't hurt, not expensive, safe, might help is a good idea. L-methylfolate. You can take both the vitamin D and L-methylfolate in addition to being on most medications. If you are on antidepressant medications through your provider, check with him. But as a rule, adding it even to an antidepressant is a good thing, not a bad thing.
And I think that it's helpful to have reasonable expectations of yourself after birth. When prolactin is high after delivery, even after a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a tubal pregnancy, your sex drive is going to be low. And to just understand that and to have reasonable expectations of yourself during that time, it's going to take time for your body to heal and to balance out. And so be patient with your body. And also, there's a need. When you're grieving, we know from the brain science research that more companionship and connection with safe people is definitely healing to the brain. And so making provision for that, because our natural tendency is to withdraw when we're in pain. And so we want to be intentional about making room for those safe connections.
Is this a place where we can talk about spouses?
Sure. Why not?
Because we generally assume your spouse and partner is a safe person. But spouses and partners may not understand exactly what your feelings are in going through this loss of a pregnancy. To them, it may just be something to get over. And unfortunately, we marry opposites. As a rule, we tend to be attracted to someone that has the opposite skills or the opposite even feeling sets than we do. Likes don't really glue together sometimes as much as opposites.
And their world is upside down too.
Their world is upside down, but they may process it and feel it differently than you do.
Yes.
And it's important to not exclude your spouse, but to try to communicate at times like this about the differences in the way you're processing things.
Yes.
Your needs may be different than your spouse at this time, but must try to reconnect.
Yes, and not only your needs, but like you said, the way you are coping and processing, those can be very different, and that's okay.
Different skill sets, totally.
Different skill sets, different experiences, and that's okay. That's okay. But communication is really the key.
That's what we hope can open up, is the communication. Your sex drive may be totally different at a time like this. It may have been different to begin with, but times like this, certainly, they may be going in opposite directions. And you want to give yourself time and allow this to renormalize slowly. That's one of the things that's going to be last on the list, to renormalize. But touching is important. That's where the communication is important, that the partner doesn't misunderstand maybe the lack of desire as a rejection.
Good.
The last thing you need on your plate is a partner that misunderstands your feelings and thinks that you're rejecting them because of what you're going through, or that this will never change.
Yes, and to just use your words and say that this is not a personal rejection. And to be really clear about that. When you're healing after loss, you've got to give yourself a whole lot of grace and a whole lot of permission to meet your needs in ways that make a positive difference. And later today, we're going to send you the notes of all the things that Dr. Swarner's covered today, so that you'll have that for looking at in concrete, black and white, right in front of you, and hopefully capitalizing on some of those points. But right now, I want to tell you one way that you can take your support and your healing process another step further. I mentioned earlier that I have a special heart for moms who have suffered a pregnancy loss or have lost a baby after that baby was a part of their lives for a while. And there just are not enough hours in my clinical private practice to be able to help those that really want the help in processing their grief. So I've developed and created a brand new online live interactive course for moms who have lost a baby. And it is going to be launched in April. It's going to be 2 hours on Saturday morning from 10 to noon, April 8th, April 15th, and April 23rd. And if that's not a convenient time for you, you don't have to worry about that, because I'm recording all of it. For those that are interested in being a part of this, I would like to take your healing and your training for skills on how to process grief a step further. I'm going to accept 15 people into this group. I have to keep it small because I want it to be a close group. And I want to be able to give one-on-one coaching with those women as well. So I'm going to offer this to the first 15 women who decide to sign up. And there's some wonderful other benefits we're going to do.
Well, Pam, that's exciting, because that connects people with what we call output. I mean, you take this in as input, and I listen to your talking or me talking, into the computer screen. But when you start interacting, asking questions, filling out things in a workbook, processing along with your teacher, that's when you start learning, and that's when the healing starts to go into a different level.
It can kind of help accelerate it. I wish I'd had this years ago. I really do. I wish I could take the 30 years that I've learned things and gained through my studies, and I wish I'd had that back then.
The tools are incredible now.
The tools and just the basic skills that can help us move forward more quickly through the grieving process and gain that point of balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
We fully believe that any woman who has suffered the loss of a baby, they can discover meaning in the process. They can experience positive transformation. They can rise up strong when they have the skills that promote that healing and that prevent them from getting stuck in that prolonged, complicated grief. When I was writing the Empty Arms Journal, I came across some research that frankly blew my mind. I learned in a study with around 300 women who had suffered a miscarriage that they were interviewed over several segments over 2 years. After 2 years, 59% of those women were stuck in prolonged grief.
Ouch.
Ouch. That's a vast majority.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want that for you.
We know that being walled off,
Yeah.
isolated, self-help books are good, but when you start doing the workbooks, start producing some output, connecting, asking questions, getting feedback, that's when healing has a much better chance of taking hold.
Yeah. So if you would like more information on this on-live training, which will happen this coming April over 3 Saturday mornings, you can go to pamvredevelt.com/pilot and check that information out. Those of you that are ready to jump in, go there. It'll be a first come, first serve basis for the first 15 moms that decide to jump in. Warner, do you have any closing ideas that you'd like to share with us? A word of encouragement for our audience.
Well, the encouragement is that there is hope. And grief, it's not something to just avoid and get away from. It's unfortunately part of this sinful world's experience. These type of stresses are the most powerful, emotional, physically, I can't even put it into words. These are traumatic events. But the one thing we do take away from it is when it does call us to reconnect with our Creator.
Yeah.
And I feel so sorry for those that don't have a connection in these times to draw on. And that connection, the stronger it becomes, the more, I can't say there's good meaning in this ever happening, but we realize that this is the very core of what God intended for us to understand when He gave His only Son to us as a gift for our healing and salvation.
Yeah.
So the loss of a child, the loss of a pregnancy to a mother, the grieving process brings to us the most powerful story of the entire process of our healing and restoring relationship with God. From the loss of Abel to Adam and Eve to, the stories. It's so powerful that this is brought to us not to punish us, but in some way to open up our hearts to understand that we've got a better home.
Yeah.
And that's what's coming. And to see through grief, to see some hope.
Yes.
Hope this type of experience will help all of you to begin reconnecting to get through this.
Yeah. There's so many questions and confusions that go with a loss like this and where God fits into that and why wasn't my story different? How come I didn't have a different ending to this catastrophic loss? And it's so important to have a safe place to ask those questions and to sort through those confusions with other people that are experiencing the very same thing. So one of the other things we'll do in the training, if you're interested, is we'll have our own private little Facebook group where we can interact as moms one to another as much or as little as we want. You'll have weekly downloads that you can practice all of the skills that you'll be receiving. One module is going to be on letting go of painful loss. How do we do that? What are the skills involved in that based on brain science? How do we let go of anger, the buried anger towards ourselves, God, others? We're going to give you some very concrete skills on how to do that. How do we let go of guilt and shame? The guilt that goes with my body didn't produce a healthy baby. We're going to talk about some skills that will help you release those feelings of guilt and shame, because that is the number one most prominent emotion that people suffer after a pregnancy loss. Research documents it. So I look forward to seeing you again. Warner, thank you so much for your medical expertise and sharing your time with our audience. We just appreciate your wisdom so much, and also the way you want to honor your Creator and your relationship with God. Look forward to seeing you again soon. We'll have another live chat episode in the series before too long, but until then, you take good care of yourself, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.